Welcome to Threaded Lore, where we get stories from all over internet to you. Some are mysterious, some are thrilling, and some will leave you questioning reality. Sit back, listen, and let the stories unfold.
I want to be upfront about something before I tell you this story. What I did was not strategic. It was not brave. It was not some carefully calculated move designed to expose the dysfunction of corporate culture. It was a Tuesday afternoon mistake made by a man who had been in too many meetings that week and had forgotten which window he was typing in. My name is Tom. I am 32 years old. I am a software developer. And this is the story of the email that accidentally got me promoted. Let me give you some context. I worked at a company called Vertex Solutions. About 200 people. Mid-size. Software services. The kind of company that has a ping-pong table in the break room that nobody uses because there is never time, and also the paddles have gone missing. My manager was a man named Derek. Derek was not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. Derek was a fundamentally decent human being who had, at some point in his career, attended a management training seminar from which he had never fully recovered. He had a framework for everything. A process for every process. A meeting to plan the meetings. Every quarter, Derek introduced a new initiative. The previous quarter, it had been radical transparency, which meant we had to share our weekly progress in a public Slack channel. All of it. Including, and I am not making this up, our personal growth goals for the week. Mine were always something like, drink more water. I got very good feedback on that one. This particular quarter, Derek had introduced Innovation Fridays. The concept, as Derek explained it in a 40-minute presentation, was simple. Every Friday afternoon, from 2 to 5, the entire development team would stop their normal work and spend 3 hours on self-directed innovation projects. In theory, this sounds wonderful. In practice, what it meant was that every Thursday we rushed to finish whatever we were actually supposed to be doing so that we could spend Friday afternoons sitting in the innovation room, which was just the medium-sized meeting room with the word innovation written on the whiteboard, staring at our laptops trying to look innovative. The actual innovation that came out of Innovation Fridays, in the 2 months since Derek had introduced it, was a browser extension that changed the word synergy to the word bees in any document. Which was, genuinely, the most useful thing any of us had produced in months. But that is a different conversation. Let me tell you more about the culture at Vertex before I get to the email. Every company has its own particular flavor of dysfunction. Some places have the aggressive kind. Loud arguments in open-plan offices. Politics sharp enough to cut yourself on. Vertex had the polite kind. The kind where everyone is very reasonable in every meeting and then goes back to their desk and sends a carefully worded email that is technically professional and also unmistakably an act of quiet aggression. We had a Slack channel called General that was used exclusively for announcements that everyone read, nobody responded to, and at least 3 people screenshot every week for reasons that were never entirely clear. We had a quarterly company all-hands meeting that ran for 2.5 hours, and always ended with a slide that said, "Our people are our strength," above a stock photo of people who did not work at Vertex laughing at a laptop. Nobody had ever pointed out that the people in that photo were visibly not the same people as the people in the company. It had become a tradition to leave it unpointed out. We also had a Wellness Wednesday initiative, which meant that every Wednesday morning there was fruit in the kitchen. Just fruit. Left on the counter. No instruction, no context. just a bowl of apples that appeared at 9 and was gone by 10 and was never spoken of. I ate a lot of those apples. They were the best part of the initiatives. I had been drafting my analysis document for about 6 weeks before the incident. It had started as a list. Things I found frustrating. Things I would change if anyone asked. Nobody had asked. But I kept adding to the list anyway. It had become a kind of hobby, the way some people do crosswords or go running. I apparently processed workplace frustration by writing extremely detailed critiques that I had no intention of sending to anyone. By the time of the incident, the document was 4,000 words. I had a section on meeting culture, a section on the product roadmap, a section titled Derek, which I will not read from here, and the CEO blog post analysis, which had started as one paragraph and had expanded into something that, looking back on it now, probably contained more genuine strategic insight than most things that had been formally presented to that executive team in the previous year. Not because I am particularly insightful, but because I had nothing to lose when I was writing it. I was writing for an audience of 0. And writing for an audience of 0 is very clarifying. On the Tuesday in question, I was writing an email. Not the email. Just an email. A normal work email to a colleague about a deadline. But I had also been, for the previous 20 minutes, drafting something in a separate window. A document I had been adding to for several weeks. Part venting. Part genuine analysis. Part, if I am honest, therapeutic exercise. I had written, in considerable detail, exactly what I thought about Innovation Fridays. About the structural reason it could not work. About the 3 specific policy decisions made in the last year that had created the conditions for good developers to leave. About the gap between what leadership thought the culture was and what the culture actually was. And at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, I had written one sentence about the CEO's blog post. The one he had published the previous Friday about the company's exciting future trajectory. I had described it as the most optimistic fiction published since the final book in a fantasy series where the author clearly ran out of ideas. I was quite proud of that line. I finished my email to my colleague. I clicked send. And then I looked at the sent folder. And I saw that the email I had just sent was not addressed to my colleague. It was addressed to alavertexsolutions.com. The company-wide mailing list. 200 people. Including Derek. Including Derek's manager. Including the CEO. Including, I noticed with a specific kind of horror, the CEO's personal assistant, who I knew from previous experience printed every email the CEO received. I want to describe what the next 4 minutes felt like. You know the sensation of reaching for a glass and knocking it off the table and watching it fall in what feels like slow motion, but you cannot move fast enough to catch it? It was like that, except the glass was my entire career. And the table was my life. And the floor was also my life. And everything was the floor. My first instinct was to recall the email. I hit recall. For those who do not know, email recall is a feature that exists specifically to make you feel like you are doing something while actually doing nothing. What recall does, in practice, is send every recipient a second notification that says, Tom Webb has recalled a message, which is corporate email for, Tom Webb has done something he deeply regrets. By the time I had recalled the email, 43 people had already opened it. I could see the read receipts coming in, one after another. like a very slow, very terrible applause. My second instinct was to send a follow-up. Something along the lines of, "Please disregard my previous email, sent in error, apologies." I typed this. I reviewed it. I decided it sounded professional and appropriately mortified. I clicked send. I had, in my panic state, selected reply all again. 112 people now had both emails. I put my head on my desk. I kept it there for a while. The replies started coming in about 8 minutes after the original email. The first one was from a developer named Marcus on the Edinburgh team. It said, and I am quoting this from memory, "Finally someone said it." The second was from a product manager in the Boston office. She said, "The Bees extension is genuinely the most useful thing we have shipped this year, and that is a problem." The third was from someone I had never interacted with in 3 years at the company. She replied all with a 17-point breakdown of the onboarding process and why it was costing the company approximately 2 months of productivity per new hire. She had clearly been waiting some time to send this. By midday, I had 31 reply-alls. Most of them were in agreement. Several of them were considerably more detailed than my original email. One of them contained a spreadsheet. I had accidentally started a revolution. I was not the leader this revolution deserved. But I was the one it had. Derek called me at 2:15. I answered with the energy of a man preparing to be executed who has decided the dignified thing is to face it calmly. Derek said, "Tom, I have read your email." I said, "Derek, I owe you an enormous apology." Derek said, "I have read it 3 times." I said I could explain. Derek said there was nothing to explain. He said the email was clear and detailed, and he had forwarded it to his own manager 20 minutes ago. I said, "You forwarded it?" He said yes. I said, "Intentionally?" He said yes. There was a pause. Then Derek said something I was completely unprepared for. He said, "I have been trying to make this argument for 8 months. I could never get it written down clearly enough. You did it in one email." He said, "Also, the fantasy series line was very good." I said thank you. He said he thought so too, and he was going to use it in his presentation to the executive team on Thursday. I said, "Your presentation?" He said yes. He said, "You are going to be there too?" I said, "I am." He said yes. He said, "Bring the analysis." All of it. He hung up. I sat very still for a long time. The executive presentation was on a Thursday. Me, Derek, Derek's manager, and the CEO, whose blog post I had compared to speculative fiction. I had spent 2 evenings preparing, turning my venting document into something that looked deliberate, adding data, structuring arguments, making it look like the work of someone who had planned this rather than someone who had accidentally emailed 200 people on a Tuesday. The CEO's name was Richard. Richard was in his late 50s. He had the look of a man who had been told he was visionary enough times that he had started to believe it. He read through my analysis. He asked 3 questions. Detailed, specific questions. The kind that told me he had read it carefully rather than skim reading it before the meeting. Then he looked at me and said, "Why have I not seen this before now?" I considered several possible answers. I said, "I think the channels for this kind of feedback were not particularly clear." He nodded. He said he agreed. He said, "What would you change?" I told him, "All of it." The 3 policy issues. The onboarding problem. The gap between the stated culture and the actual culture. He wrote things down. Innovation Fridays was canceled the following week. 3 months later, I was moved into a strategy role. Not because I had done something brilliant. Not because I had played the game correctly. Because I had accidentally emailed the whole company, and a chain reaction of honesty had somehow produced a better outcome than 2 years of proper process. The developer who had sent the 17-point onboarding breakdown was put in charge of redesigning it. The product manager from Boston became the head of a new team. The Bees extension was officially adopted as a company tool. I am not joking about that last one. I still work there. Different role. More interesting work. The ping pong table now has paddles. Derek and I have lunch occasionally. He has a new framework now. It is called structured honesty. It is essentially the same as everything else, except it encourages people to write things down before sending them to 200 colleagues by mistake. I told him I thought that was a good framework. He said he got the idea from an email I sent. I said, I know. He said, the irony is not lost on me either. The thing I have thought about most since all of this is not the promotion, not the presentation, not the policy changes. It is the 31 reply. Alls. 31 people in that company had the same thoughts I had, the same observations, the same frustrations written out in a document somewhere that they had never sent to anyone. And all it took for those thoughts to surface was one person accidentally pressing the wrong button. I am not recommending this as a strategy. Please do not email your entire company. But I do think about what was sitting in people's drafts folders. What goes unsaid in every office. Not because people do not have the thoughts, but because nobody wants to be the one who accidentally hits reply all first. I was that person. It worked out. Do not try this at home. Leave your reply. All horror stories in the comments. I know you have one. Everyone has one. Subscribe for a new story every week. See you in the next one.
If you like the lore, please like the video, comment your views, share it with others, and please subscribe for more.